Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our spring conference here in Huntingdon, which of course was central to Oliver Cromwell's Eastern Association, and so an important part of English history, quite a well-known role that Huntingdon played. Also, as you may know, we're not far from the village of Tilbrook, from which my family takes its surname. So I thought, where could be more appropriate for our conference? I've got an old map of Huntingdon here, and you might see, if you come and have a look at it during the break, not only have you got Tilbrook just over here, but you've got the homeland of the Iceni just here. So, in fact, a lesser-known part of Huntingdon's role in history was being the homeland of Boadicea, or Boudica, as they inclined to call her these days. And, of course, she is an example of heroism on a grand scale, really, when she and her family were unfairly treated in the most appalling way by the Romans, including her daughters being raped. She led a revolt that nearly swept the Romans from power in this country, which, of course, as they were then the superpower, was quite an achievement. So, all in all, a good place, I'd say, for our conference. And I hope you've all found the hotel easy to get to and a nice venue. Given all the comments on my jokes, you won't mind if I cut that section before I get catcalls and boos from all quarters.
I like your jokes.
Oh, Colin, thank you. But also, what an interesting time, isn't it, to be talking politics for patriots and nationalists. Not only have we had Trump in America and the Brexit vote here, but also the hysterical reaction of Ramonas and Romaniacs on finding that they're not actually the majority and that other people do have opinions. Isn't it a laugh, ladies and gentlemen, when they constantly claim that it's Russia that has inspired those of us on our side of the fence? Whereas, in fact, it's just that liberal so-called democracy had so long denied us a voice that they had grown to assume that our voice didn't actually exist. On the continent, we've also just had the Italian elections, in which the centre-left have been reduced to a small rump. The Austrians have elected a nationalist-orientated government. There were already nationalist governments in most of Eastern Europe. But all across mainland Europe, the left and centre-left are in retreat, and patriots and nationalists are advancing. Even here in England, last Monday, we had a launch by the University College of London's Constitution Unit, no friends to us, I'd say, who have produced a report comfortingly entitled, from our party's point of view, Options for an English Parliament. There's the report. Which you can download, and I've got some spare copies as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I do recommend reading it, as it does give you a clear idea of the state of the arguments. But I think the subtext is that we were so right to adopt English independence as our keynote policy, because it is the answer that cuts through all the various quibbling objections which those that do not want to allow England any sort of democratically united voice make to any idea of an English Parliament, English First Minister or English government. Those of us who for years campaigned on a federalist ticket will recognise so well the kind of technical arguments and objections which have been raised against the key emotional point that England and the English nation are not being fairly or democratically treated as things stand at the moment in the so-called United Kingdom. I think it's also worth talking about the state of the various parties. Let me take these in no particular order, but starting with the Conservatives. Obviously, the Conservative and Unionist Party, as the party in government, does have many apparent advantages, not least that over Brexit. Despite all the muddle and confusion and arguments, the Conservatives are somewhat more coherent than Labour on the idea that we must actually get out of the European Union. As you will expect, and I expect all of you are too, I am strongly in favour of getting out not only of the European Union, but also the European Union's customs union and of the European Union's single market, and thus fully and properly get out. There's no Brexino, Brexit in name only for me. Is anybody here who's a Brexino person? No, I didn't think there would be. However, it is worth noting that if the overwhelming majority, and I say if the overwhelming majority of Remainers in Parliament sabotage a full Brexit, but we are still out of the key constitutional institutions, which are the European Union itself, then there is no constitutional problem with later adjusting any of these other agreements at a later stage. Whereas while we were in the European Union, we have the constitutional difficulty that we're not allowed to change the basis of the way that we work with the European Union. This means that further progress on the European Union will be down to our own politics, and if our people can be persuaded to vote for a party who wants to do a more thorough job of Brexit, then that could be done at a later stage. That is therefore a constitutionally important position for us to get to, even if we're let down on the other items. The Conservatives will be judged by whether they deliver on this. If they fail to do so, it will damage them irreparably. Because what became clear during the Brexit referendum was that their MPs, who are mostly dishonest Europhiles, who had pretended to be Eurosceptics in order to get themselves selected by the overwhelming majority of Conservative Party members who are Eurosceptics. Indeed, if they and Theresa May and her Remainer colleagues are in fact so worried by the preponderance of Leave Conservative Party members, the majority of members being Eurosceptics, that they are in fact wanting to take control from local party members one of the few rights that remain to them, which is a role in selecting their local candidate to be their MP. In recent months, there hasn't been much publicity about this, but it's out there. There has been a push by Conservative Central Office for the selection of MP candidates for the next general election to be left to be given entirely into the control of Central Office, and therefore, for as long as she's leader, of Theresa May and her Remainer inner circle of acolytes. Turning to Jeremy Corbyn's Labour, the massive majority of Blairite Remainiacs in the Labour Parliamentary Party has finally pushed Jeremy Corbyn into adopting a more pro-EU position, that is, on remaining within the customs union. Coming out of the customs union, I would say, is vital if there is to be any agreements with any other nations. If we are in the customs union, not only can we not reach agreements with other nations on trade, but also the other nations wouldn't even be interested in talking to us, because they will know that they can trade with us by dealing with the European Union, and we would have to obey what the European Union decides. And in fact, Bridget was earlier telling me that there's just a further bit of news on that one, with the EU threatening to fine us enormous sums of money if we try to do any deal with Trump on his tariffs for steel. So, this is a troubling change of position on the part of Jeremy Corbyn, but it illustrates something that has been happening within the Labour Party for a long time, which is that the Labour's elite has been losing touch with its core traditional vote, or as they call it, the white working class, or as I would call it, English workers. Our candidate for South Yorkshire mayoralty, David Allen, who unfortunately can't be here today, as Steve was saying, because of his father, memorably and pithily put it in a recent BBC interview that Labour are traitors to the English working class. More and more English people are realising that Labour is outright hostile to England and English interests. Labour now is an internationalist and increasingly metropolitan, statist and multiculturalist party. This is the same trajectory as all the Social Democrat parties across Western Europe have taken. The result across Western Europe has been that social democrat parties are no longer supported by their country's working classes. So, for instance, in the recent French elections, we saw that French working class voters mostly supported the Front National and not the middle class ideological obsessives of the French social democrat parties. As the Doncaster MP Caroline Flint put it on the most recent programme of This Week, that Labour's sister party in France was reduced to a rump of 6% of the vote at that election. That's how far the Social Democrats across the European Union have fallen in some parts. Parties that used to rule and expect to be more or less constantly in power. I fully expect that with the Blairites in Parliament and with Jeremy Corbyn's small parliamentary support group of far-left MPs and with their middle-class supporters in Momentum, etc., that the divide between the Labour Party and its traditional support will grow eventually into an unbridgeable chasm. We can only look forward to that day. So far as the Liberal Democrats are concerned, they, I think, have shrunk into an almost total permanent irrelevance, as have the Greens. UKIP, of course, is of interest to us, as during the time of its rise and when the prospect of an EU referendum dominated political discussion, they seemed on the verge of becoming a fully established and influential political party. However, following the EU referendum result, their one and only issue has dramatically declined in importance, as we now have had the referendum, and because they are not and could never be in government, they can have no influence over what happens now. This problem for them has, of course, been compounded by UKIP's leadership problems, because there never really was any real agreement on policy outside of the EU issue within UKIP. It would always be very hard for any UKIP leader to successfully unite all the various different opinions within UKIP. But in addition to that, their party structure is one where there has always been problems about their leader's position. Nigel Farage went so far as to say in his arguments with UKIP's NEC that members of UKIP's NEC were, and I quote, the lowest grade of people he had ever come across. Or he said, had ever come across. It's a bit difficult to take at face value, given that quite a few of them are successful professionals and business people. This must really be, I would suggest, an expression of frustration at the degree of difficulty in dealing with them that he experienced as UKIP's leader. And nothing, of course, can more clearly exemplify this difficulty than the forcing out of their latest leader, Mr. Bolton, based mostly on the scandal of him having left his wife. I wonder who here follows Guido Fawkes on the internet. He made a joke, probably a better joke than I would have made, about UKIP's leadership elections, which made me chuckle. He said it was like watching three bald men arguing about who got the hairbrush. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. Then let's turn to us. We English Democrats have a wide-ranging platform based on the English nationalist position of looking after the interests of the English nation. We're not a single-issue party and never have been. Indeed, it's worth illustrating how we came to be a Eurosceptic party. We didn't come at it from the UKIP angle of simply being hostile to the EU. We came at it from analysing whether it was actually possible to be an English nationalist and to be pro-EU. We came to the conclusion that you simply couldn't manage it. It couldn't make any logical sense. This is because the EU wants to break up England into regions, so they're against our very existence as a nation. The EU also costs us a lot of money. All the £19 billion that people were arguing about on the back of the red bus during the EU referendum is money that comes from English taxpayers, as only England has a net tax revenue. Also, the EU is not very democratic. So, what we get in the EU is laws made for us in an undemocratic way that are against our interests and cost us a lot of money. So it's obvious, isn't it, that supporting the EU could never be a position that any sensible English nationalist could take. It is worth considering by comparison with all the fuss that has been made about the EU that actually the Union of the United Kingdom is a much bigger issue. Not only because of the House of Lords report in 2009, which showed that the maintenance of the Union through the Barnett Formula and the various other subsidy arrangements was costing English taxpayers over £49 billion a year, as opposed to the then £9 billion or so pounds that the EU was costing us. But also, as has been rather graphically shown with the alliance between the Conservatives and the Democratic Unionist Party, we get political decision-making made in Westminster in the interests of other parts of the United Kingdom and of Britain generally, but not in the interests of England. Our party's political position is one where even the leftist academics of the University College of London's Constitutional Unit have in their report said that we have, English nationalists have, legitimate grievances. Ladies and gentlemen, just let that sink in. We English nationalists, even our opponents now accept, have legitimate grievances. What have we got? Remember it. Consider also what Labour's attack dogs, the Dirty Tricks Department, Hope Not Hate, had to say about the issue of where we are potentially. Here's what they said based on a populist opinion poll survey. 39% of the people that they interviewed in this populist poll, and it was a poll of Britain, not just of England. Bear that in mind. 39% said they were willing to support a party focused on defending the English, opposing immigration, challenging Islamic extremism, and restricting the building of mosques. That's what Hope Not Hate's opinion poll says. Britain-wide survey, 39% would support that. What do you think of that, ladies and gentlemen? The question then arises how we can turn legitimate grievances and political opportunity into power. Because obviously that's what a political party is all about in the end. The first point, ladies and gentlemen, that we have to accept is it's a very difficult transition. If it wasn't difficult, lots of others would do it. But it is, and it's a big, and it is a big but, it can be done. It's not only being done in Italy, as we were talking about earlier, but it can be done here. It takes a lot of effort at grassroots and commitment on our part. We need not only to stand in elections, but we need to focus on trying to do better in them. We've already got to the point, as acknowledged by the academics of University College London, that our message has got out to quite a lot of people. I don't think that's surprising, ladies and gentlemen, because we have now distributed somewhat in excess of 40 million leaflets since we were founded. We have been consistently the lone small voice crying in the wilderness for English nationalism. Let us move forward with that and become the voice that the British mainstream media cannot ignore and that our political opponents ignore at their peril. We're going to have some discussions about what can be done later. I'll therefore leave that at this point. But I do encourage everyone who is willing to help to think about standing elections and doing the work that's needed to do well in elections. If we turn to the state of politics generally in the United Kingdom, let me ask you this question, which came up recently. Is the UK's British political establishment now a classic cartel democracy? I hadn't come across the term cartel democracy until quite recently, but I was reading an article by the Conservative MP, Daniel Hannan, in the Sunday Telegraph. And he called his article, "Coalition Politics Has Turned European Democracy into a Beige Dictatorship," which caught my interest. In that article, he says, several Western European countries have had German-style traditions of permanent coalition. In some of them, favoured parties were more or less permanently in office. These became known as the cartel democracies because the ruling parties used legal and financial barriers to prevent newcomers from breaking through. Austria, Belgium and Italy were textbook cartel democracies for most of the post-war era. You can always spot the symptoms, wrote Daniel Hannan. The public sector grows as the various coalition partners scramble to find sinecures for their supporters. In Austria, during the Christian Democrat, Social Democrat duopoly, every position, from the headmaster of a village school to the director of the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, might be allocated according to party membership card. These membership cards, by the way, were actual physical things. The Italian versions, beribboned and bemedalled, were especially magnificent, signifying, as they did, a precious IOU. Cartel politicians, being unchallenged, could award themselves handsome perks, such as legal immunities, high salaries. When I was first elected to the European Parliament, MEPs were paid at the same rate as the national parliamentarian in their home country. The Austrians, Italians and Germans earned twice as much as anyone else. The cartel parties were quite flagrant in their attempts to stop newcomers from posing a challenge. In Belgium, for example, restrictions on private donations made political parties dependent on state funding, which was then withdrawn from the Flemish separatists following a parliamentary vote by their rivals. Secure in office, the old parties were able to ignore public demands for tax cuts, immigration controls, powers back from Brussels, or anything else they could fastidiously dismiss as populist. Because leaders from a previous generation generally decided who could stand on their party lists, politics remained stuck in a 50s corporatist concession. This is Daniel Hannan still, if you'll forgive me for reading a little bit more in the article, so I think it's useful. Only in the 90s did the system start to break down. Fed up with the complacency and sleaze of their semi-permanent rulers, voters began to grope around for battering rams to smash open the old system. In Italy, they found a Trumpian avant la lettre, Silvio Berlusconi, who made a point of issuing no party membership cards. In Austria, they turned to Jörg Hager's anti-immigration Freedom Party. In Belgium, they elected the Flemish nationalists. Only in Germany did the old partyocracy remain intact, at least until now. Last year, Germany's Christian Democrats suffered their worst result since 1949. The Social Democrats suffered their worst result since 1933. That's worth thinking about for a moment, as to what happened in 1933. How would it look if the two losers got together, and this is him writing before they had actually got together, to form a government based on all the things that had characterised the old racket? More immigration, deeper European integration, little economic reform, and the dismissal of all opposition as unconscionable populism. Well, of course, in Germany, they have formed that coalition, and the result is already becoming apparent because the Alternative for Deutschland party is now ahead of Caroline Flint's sister party, the Social Democrat Party, in the opinion polls. So I think we can see what's likely to happen come the next German elections. And those don't bode well for the cartel parties. Now, these comments chime strongly with my experiences of the way in which Labour and the Conservatives have embedded themselves within the state, in such a way that for years now it has seemed to matter little which party was technically in power, the classic lib-lab con. Even when the other party is in power, many of the key people within what is supposed to be its rivals still have plum political patronage jobs. So I looked a little further and found the BBC's home editor, Mark Easton, had written an article which was published on the 12th of June 2017, which asked, "Has British democracy let its people down?" Now, Mark Easton, I would say, is a professional journalist, but he is by no means a friend to us or to our cause. He is a Labour supporter, but I would say a moderate Labour supporter rather than a Corbynista, which quite a lot of BBC are. And Mark Easton says, "Parliamentary democracy is one of the British values that English schools are now required by statute to promote during lessons. Not debate, not discuss, but promote. If some teachers interpret their new role as propagandists for this kingdom's existing system of government, that would be a shame, because right now there are questions about how well our form of democracy is serving the UK. Far from providing the stability and legitimacy it promises, one could argue that our democratic system has served to expose and deepen social divisions. Some would say it has even contrived to leave our country vulnerable at a critical moment in its history. Rather than seeking to close down critical challenge of our form of democracy, do we need a serious and urgent conversation about how we can improve matters? Our two main political parties were founded and involved to deal with the social and economic challenges of the Industrial Revolution. Conservative and Labour, left and right, capitalism and socialism, these ideological movements were a response to the economic and cultural challenges of power moving from the field to the factory. But power is moving again, says Mark Easton, from the national to the multinational. How citizens think we should respond to that shift is the new divide in our politics. Mark Easton says, it is less about left and right and more about nationalism against globalism. Old-fashioned political tribalism is actually on the wane, and the diminution of local government in England, the weakening of the trade union movement, the impotence of political protest movements, the increasing centralisation of overarching authority to one house in Downing Street, these add to the sense that the demos, the people, are increasingly excused from the kratos, the power. I think much of what Mark Easton has to say here is right, particularly in his analysis of what the division now is, not left and right, rather globalist or internationalist against nationalist and patriotic. It was said by many of the more astute commentators, including Professor Matthew Goodwin, now of Kent University, that the appeal of Euroscepticism and of Brexit to English nationalists anxious to get our country back and to take back control was, when focused solely on the EU, somewhat misconceived. Professor Goodwin in particular was saying that for the people who identify themselves as being English, that their desire to get back control was a confused response, because the problem wasn't the EU, it was the British political establishment which is seeking to break England up and to change English society and English communities in ways that English people don't want. Its support, the British political establishment's support of the EU, was a symptom of this attitude. So the real struggle ought to be focused on England and on the English taking back control. The British state and the British political establishment not only no longer cares about them or about what they think about things, but is also actively working against English interests. Its default position is internationalist or globalist. So there we are, cartel democracy, supporting the way that the system works and supporting the power of the establishment in its position. And it's something that we, of course, have to challenge. So can we cut through all of the barriers that cartel democracy creates? Well, that's our task, but it is worth bearing in mind, as Daniel Hannan said, that cartel democracies existed and were thoroughly entrenched, more thoroughly, I would say, than is the case in the UK, in both Austria and Italy. And in both those countries, the cartel parties have now been elbowed aside. So it is possible, it can be done, but I think it's worth considering the sort of type of thing that's being used to entrench the current system. Martin Measton sort of mentioned it, and I think we're going to get one of our speakers this afternoon who's got something similar to say about this, and it's worth perhaps thinking about. Because the thing is that those who are in power in this country are redefining the word extremism, and that is a significant thing. The Guardian on the 23rd of January had an article by their journalist, their political correspondent Peter Walker, which was headed "New National Security Unit Set Up to Tackle Fake News in UK." The key extracts from that article are: the government is to set up a dedicated national security unit to tackle fake news and disinformation, Downing Street has said. The Prime Minister's spokesman said one specific area agreed as needing new resources is by the National Security Council as part of the NSCR is the spread of fake news. He said, "We are living in an era of fake news and competing narratives. The government will respond with more and better use of national security communications to tackle these interconnected, complex challenges. To do this, we will build on existing capabilities by creating a dedicated national security communications unit. This will be tasked with combating disinformation by state actors and others. The unit will more systematically deter our adversaries and help us deliver on national security priorities," he added, saying there was yet no information on where it would be based or who would staff it. Obviously, very much bureaucrat jargonese there, but nevertheless, I think the point comes through. It's worth noting that the Oxford definition of extremism is the holding of extreme political or religious views, fanaticism. However, anyone who is not a fully signed up multiculturalist, or to quote the Judicial Appointments Commission on the requirement for judicial office in our cartel democracy, a person who can demonstrate a lifelong commitment to equality and diversity, should bear in mind what I explained in one of my recent blog articles called "Fight the Good Fight with All Thy Might." When I pointed out that now even a scripturally based Christian has been redefined by the British government as an extremist. Also, the expression of any views or odds with the official one is likely to be classed as offensive, just like the Electoral Commission called our slogan, "England worth fighting for," offensive. This means, of course, that we are now truly in a political landscape where it can be rightly be called out saying what John Tyndall did some years ago. The first lesson is to realise that it is our lack of power, not our so-called extremism, that is the big deterrent. And anyway, what is extremism? At different times across history, extremism has meant different things. So what has changed since then? Has the truth changed? Is what was true then no longer true now? No. What has changed is power. Power was then in different hands, and that is what we're up against. Those who have the power today, they're able to determine what is mainstream and respectable and what is extreme. We have to understand that extremism is a meaningless term. It is entirely what the current makers of public opinion decide it will be. No more, no less. Our activity must be geared towards the winning of power. That still has to be said to some people. They are crusaders for the truth, but they don't relate it to necessities of winning power. It cannot be said enough Power is what must be won. First, just a little bit of power, then more power, and finally complete power. Activity geared to anything else is a waste of time. But we one day will be answerable to our grandchildren, and our grandchildren are going to say to us, when that great day of decision came, what did you do? Did you give in, or did you fight? Are we going to say to them, well, the struggle was too severe, the odds were too strong, perhaps we left it a little bit too late, we hadn't a chance, and therefore we lost our country, we lost our nationhood? Or will we be able to say to them, with pride and honour, I was one of those who fought, and there were more and more of us who came and fought with me. I went off into the streets and worked and struggled for our cause. We stood firm like the men at the Alamo, the men at Rorke's Drift, like the men at Blood River. We fought to the bitter end, and we won. So it's worth bearing in mind by what is meant by the word offensive. That is also changing, and it's being changed by those in power. In the English Democrats' judicial review case, we were judicially reviewing the Election Commission refusal of our long registered description saying England is worth fighting for. They claim that this is now offensive. Evidence at the hearing was produced by the Electoral Commission of their thinking, which read as follows. L.E., who I think somewhere else is referred to as Louise, but we have no further information as to who this person is. But they are a member of their one of their directorate. I would retain all the descriptions. This is about the descriptions for the English Democrats Party, except the fighting for one. They all advocate support for England, which is itself exclusionist, i.e. it excludes other parts of the UK. But favouring one part of the UK is an established policy position that parties can and do hold, not just in relation to England. And this is what she goes on to say, and I'm quoting exactly. If the slogans referred to the English, I would be more concerned, as that is a distinction based on race. I don't think you can read English into England in this instance. In my view, the phrase worth fighting for is commonly used and understood in a non-violent context. Phrases like ideas worth fighting for or relationships worth fighting for are common, try a Google search, and would not be read to mean physically fighting for them. If this description was seen in the context of all the others, I think it would be reasonably clear its intention was non-violent. Seen as on its own, however, as it could be on the ballot paper, I think that it is arguable that the only way to fight for England is a violent or militaristic way. Seen as on its own, I think it can be viewed as offensive in the context of this by-election. It is the potential for that to happen, which leads me to conclude that we should remove it. So, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Mentioning England is exclusionary. Exclusionist, I beg your pardon. And if you mention the English, then that's racist. No, it doesn't matter for others. Or the Scottish National Party. So it now appears, and by the way, it is worth mentioning that there is a Welsh party. Their slogan is fighting for Wales. That's fine. The Electoral Commission have kept that. So now it appears that it's okay, as I say, that one slogan, which is still registered with the Electoral Commission, Wales worth fighting for, is okay. And of course the Scottish National Party is allowed to fight for Scotland, but the English are not allowed to, because that's exclusionary or racist. So, and by the way, it's actually, I think, possibly just worth considering what the Oxford Dictionary says about offensive, because it isn't just about offensive itself isn't just about being an opinion that any individual could hold. Anyway, this is what it says. As an adjective, first item is causing someone to feel resentful, upset or annoyed. The allegations made are deeply offensive to us. Offensive language. These examples. 1-1, of a sight or smell, disgusting or repulsive, an offensive odour. Attributive, actively aggressive, attacking, offensive operations against the insurgents. Of a weapon, meant for use in attack. He's convicted of possessing an offensive weapon. North American term, relating to the team in possession of the ball or puck in a game. So, England worth fighting for is now offensive, according to the establishment. And if you can see, I think, that in effect they're not only redefining extremism, but they are redefining what words can be said. And so the British establishment wants to be able to redefine what it considers to be offensive rather than taking into account what ordinary people think or even what the Oxford Dictionary says that word means. As per George Orwell's 1984, war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the age of cartel democracy in the UK, where even our English language has been co-opted into the cartel party's determination to dominate us all and extinguish English nationhood. Who here is willing to let them do so without a fight? Is there anybody? No. We need to stand up for our country. England, I say, ladies and gentlemen, I say England is worth fighting for, whatever they may say. Thank you very much.